Greek love. Eros Hellenikos.
It's Friday, April the 8th, 2011, and I'm interviewing Arthur Evans today about Plato and his Symposium, which we usually think of as a rather dry thing, the common person. Can you tell me, who was Plato?
Plato was a philosopher who lived in ancient Athens and flourished in the 4th century BC. And his dialogue, Symposium, in Greek is Symposion, which means drinking together. And it's a dialogue about a banquet. Symposia were banquets where people of the same sex got together and drank. But this symposium was different because they decided, instead of drinking to the point of passing out, which they usually did, they would stop and discuss a topic. And the topic they decided to discuss was Eros, the god of love, especially the patron of same-sex love. So this dialogue is anything but dry. It's pretty wild at times. It's funny, it's very dramatic, it's profound, it's ironic, and at times it seems to contradict itself, just like life, right? And the format of the dialogue is, these are the best minds of Athens at the time. Socrates, the philosopher, Aristophanes, the comic poet, Agathon, the tragic poet, a famous physician, and others. And each of them gives a praise of the god Eros. And the praises get more and more elaborate and metaphysical and otherworldly. And the last to speak is the philosopher Socrates. And he presents this very elaborate, otherworldly, metaphysical, almost religious view of Eros, the god of love, culminating in a mystical vision of Eros, of beauty in and of itself, above the universe, infusing the entire universe with beauty and order. And everyone is just amazed at this beautiful expression. And they stop in silence. Then there's a noise at the door.
And what's that?
In comes Alcibiades.
And who is he?
Alcibiades was the lover of Socrates.
Oh. So
first we get this metaphysical, philosophical discussion of love. Then you get the real thing, okay? So Alcibiades comes in and he's drunk out of his mind. Alcibiades and Socrates were lovers. Alcibiades was the most beautiful man in Athens. He was rich, powerful, ambitious, politically well-connected, and totally ruthless. Socrates was poor, self-effacing, had no political ambition, and was concerned with philosophy and metaphysics.
And I understand that he was incredibly ugly.
Socrates was the ugliest man in Athens. He looked like a frog. He also looked like a Silenus or a Marsyas, which were pictures of creatures that were half animal and half human, often depicted with erections and playing pipes. That comes out in the dialogue. So Alcibiades comes in drunk, and he complains that, he says, oh, there's Socrates, my lover. He's as ugly as a Silenus. And then he complains how difficult it was for him to seduce Socrates. He went through this long routine of inviting him for dinner and trying to get him into bed, and getting rid of the servants and being alone with him. And finally, when he got him alone in bed, all Socrates wanted to do was to tell him how to be a better person. So Alcibiades starts out resentfully complaining about Socrates. But then he realizes how unusual and extraordinary Socrates was, and his complaint turns into praise. And he inadvertently produces one of the most beautiful praises of one man, lover, to another that has ever been written. And this occurs in the Dialogue Symposium. What I'm going to do now is read a brief excerpt, my own translation, of Alcibiades when he comes in, drunk, first taunting Socrates and then praising him. And then I'll conclude with a brief recitation in ancient Greek, which is different from modern Greek, a recitation in ancient Greek of the ending of Alcibiades' comments, so we get a feel for what Socrates heard. So here's the comments of Alcibiades coming in drunk, disrupting the party, taunting Socrates, and then praising him. Friends, here is how I will try to praise Socrates, with images. Now he may think I'm being rather humorous, but the image will be for the sake of truth, not humor. Well then, I say he's very much like those statues of Silenus that you find in statuary stores, of the sort that sculptures depict as having panpipes or flutes. And when they are opened up into two parts, they reveal images of the gods inside. And I say too that he's like the satyr Marsyas. Now, Socrates, the fact that you are like these two, at least in appearance, I would think that not even you can deny. And that you resemble them in other ways too. Listen to this next part. You're a teaser, or not. If you deny it, I will produce witnesses. But not a flute player. No, something far more wonderful than that. Marsyas, remember, used to charm people with musical instruments, using the energy from his mouth. And even still today, whoever plays his instruments, the instruments that Olympus used to play, I mean Marsyas' pupil, after Marsyas had taught him, these, I say, whether played well or poorly, or by a flute boy or by a flute girl, these Marsyas causes to be set aside as special, and he reveals them to those who seek the gods and their mysteries, believing they are divine. And you, Socrates, only differ from Marsyas to this extent, that you accomplish the same thing, but by mere words, without musical instruments. We, for our part, whenever we hear anyone else speaking, or other speeches by a very good public speaker, hardly anybody cares about it. But when anyone listens to you, or someone else reporting your statements, even if the reporter is very mediocre, and whether a woman listens, or a man, or whether an adolescent, we are struck and riveted. And I indeed, my friends, if I were not likely to appear totally drunk, would swear and tell you what great things I myself have felt because of his words, and still do, even now. For when I listen to him, my heart, I say, jumps more than the Corybantes, and my eyes well up with tears because of his words. And I observe that everyone else also experiences the same things. And when I used to listen to Pericles and the other fine public speakers, I thought they spoke well. But I never experienced something like this. My mind was not aroused or pricked, and I did not feel enthralled. But because of this Marsyas here, I was touched on many, many occasions, so that the life I was living no longer seemed to me to be worthwhile. If anyone should undertake to listen to Socrates' words, they might appear rather laughable at first. Such are the phrases and expressions with which he clothes himself on the outside, a sort of hide, if you will, or a teasing satyr. He talks of donkeys and pack-asses, and certain smiths and shoemakers and tanners. Now the next section I'm going to read, I will then recite in Greek.
Could you tell me a little bit about ancient Greek, because it's not going to sound like modern Greek, and why?
Dan, that's a very good question. Thank you. If you know modern Greek, you're going to be shocked by what you hear. Ancient Greek was a tonal language. The marks that appear in modern Greek today are accents, and they indicate stress. But ancient Greek indicated tones. The voice went up and down. And secondly, the vowel sounds were much richer and held out longer and fuller than in modern Greek.
How do you know this?
What we've done is there are descriptions of the ancient Greek grammarians telling people how to hold, what positions to hold their mouth and how to make sounds. So that's part of the evidence. The other part of the evidence are words that are onomatopoetic, that is, words that the playwrights used to designate the cries of animals and familiar sounds. And the third source of evidence is changes that we've seen in other languages and vowels and consonants as they progress. If you play that tape backwards, you can see that they coalesce in a certain set of sounds, and these sounds are consistent with what the ancient grammarians said and with the words that are onomatopoetic. So we have an intelligent guess of what it sounds like. If an ancient Greek heard us, they would probably say we have an accent, but they would understand us.
And he appears to keep saying the same things with the same words. As a result, all the ignorant and unthinking people may perhaps scoff at his comments. Post aperos, kaganoatos anthropos pas, anton logon, katagalas seyen. But let someone see his words opened up and get inside them. Dio egomenos tidon, antis kayantos auton gigenomenos. Then he will discover, first, that they have an internal sense, all their own. Broton menon ekontas endon monos heraseton logon. And second, that they are godlike and contain within themselves an abundance of images of excellence and have a very wide application. No, more than that. They apply to everything that should be cultivated by anyone who would be a good and refined person. Malon de bipan hoson prosake skophein toi melonti kaloika gatoi esestai. These are the things, my friends, for which I praise Socrates. Tau testinondres, hago Socrate paino.
Astounding. What is your understanding of what eros is, based on not just the Symposium, but everything else that you've learned about ancient Greece?
The Greeks saw a need for a principle to hold the world together. They were very much impressed by the fact that people and individuals and institutions and natural forces were always in conflict. But all these parts still formed a coherent system. And the force that held it together was eros, which is the delight in the beauty and goodness of the whole. So when we reach out in love or passion to another person, or to an institution, or to a system of knowledge, or to the universe as a whole, we are motivated by eros, the desire of all things to experience and express the joy of being one. That's the view expressed by Socrates in his very elevated speech. And ironically, it's also the view expressed by Alcibiades, because he comes in drunk with the idea and hope of disrupting the proceedings and breaking the whole. But in the end, he contributes to it. He can't help himself.
Has Eros played any part in your life?
Yes. I think coming out as a gay person and contributing to struggles for social justice and working to make my neighborhood safe and other things that I have done have all been motivated in the end by a desire for the beauty and goodness of the whole. But there is, I think, in many good people, perhaps in all people, a desire in some way to contribute to the whole and to celebrate the beauty of the whole. And that's the force of Eros.
Can you tell me how a Western society, since, say, the 14th or 15th century, has dealt with the Symposium and what is said in it?
That's a good question, because I was a graduate student in philosophy at Columbia University, and this dialogue was very rarely discussed, let alone other dialogues of Plato, which are profoundly philosophical and profoundly gay and funny and humorous at the same time. So Western society, hierarchical society, has had a fear and a dislike of dealing with his feelings. And ironically, this subject comes up in the Symposium. One of the speakers says, "Let us compare the liberty-loving Greeks to the monarchical, authoritarian regimes of the East run by monarch kings and emperors. Why do the Greeks love liberty so much, and why do the tyrants in the East hate it? What contributes to the one and what contributes to the other?" And he says there are three causes that encourage the Greeks to be independent, self-reliant, and loving: same-sex love, philosophy, and nude gymnastics. All three of which characterized the Greeks, and all three of which scandalized the authoritarian regimes of the East. Gymnasium
means nude, doesn't it?
Yes, it means nude things. Gymnasium. Also the name for the Greek schools, because the essential part of Greek schooling was nude athletics. And what the speaker said is that the love of people for the same sex creates a strong bond in them that will never yield to authoritarian regimes. Once you experience that bond of cohesiveness and adhesiveness and love with your comrades, you will never, once you experience that fully, it's very hard to get you to obey arbitrary, artificial authority from the outside. Secondly, nude exercising encouraged people to feel exuberant about their own bodies and self-assertive, and not yielding to, and have a sense of self-worth. And third, philosophy encouraged people to think critically for themselves and not to take belief systems and dogmas from religious or political authorities without thinking about them. So this is a very, whether you agree with these claims or not, these are important philosophical and interesting claims, and they should be discussed, I would think, in philosophy schools.
But they're not.
But they never are, no.
Now there were two playwrights in this symposium, one a comic, a comedian,
right,
and one serious.
Right.
Did either of those have any plays that dealt with Eros?
Aristophanes is the comic poet, and he later wrote a satire of Socrates, totally lampooning Socrates, and saying that Socrates encouraged lustful anal receptivity in young boys, which was not the case, but that's the way he satirized him. And that actually contributed to Socrates' death, because there was a period of political upheaval in Athens, and a group of people brought charge against Socrates in order to...
What charges did they bring?
The two charges were he corrupted the young men of Athens, and the word corrupt there has two meanings. One is intellectually corrupt, and the other is corrupt sexually. And the other charge was that he believed in gods that the state did not believe in. And he was convicted on both charges. Aristophanes appears in this dialogue, the Symposium, and he actually plays a comic role in the Symposium. It's his turn to speak, and just as he gets ready to speak, he has a fit of hiccups and cannot speak. So there's another person at the Symposium who's a physician, and he says, I'll take your turn until you get your hiccups under control, and then you can speak. And the physician says, why don't you gargle with water, and if that doesn't work, use some snuff and keep sneezing until you get rid of the hiccups. So this physician then begins to speak, and once again it's a very high, elevated, abstract praise of Eros, but in the background, through his entire speech, Aristophanes, the comic poet, is gargling and sneezing. So he's true to his role, even in the Symposium.
You have mentioned that it's an all-male gathering. Is there any evidence for female gatherings around Eros or any other subject matter?
Yes, there is, and in fact, evidence comes out in the Symposium itself.
Oh, what's that?
Because just before they decide to discuss Eros and not get totally drunk, a flute player comes in, a young woman, which was usually part of the proceedings, to play. And one of the participants says, well, I think we'll skip the flute playing part and just deal with the discussion. Why doesn't she go and join the women who are having their own symposium? Which she does. So this is just a casual comment made in passing, but indicates the women were doing the same thing. They were having their own symposium. Unfortunately, we don't have much of a record. But what is intriguing about the Symposium is that when Socrates delivers his very profound analysis of Eros, he says he learned it from a woman. Her name is Diotima, which means honored by Zeus. This is a mysterious character that Socrates says he encountered. She's almost like a shaman or a fortune teller, a wise woman. He encountered her, and she instructed him in the mysteries of Eros. And the account that he gives actually is the account that he learned from Diotima.
Is there something else you'd like to say about the Symposium or Aristotle?
I would say in general that we need some new translations of these works, because the language of the Symposium and other dialogues that Plato has written is very vital, very straightforward, very sexual, very frank, very funny, colloquial, and oftentimes these translations are very stilted and Victorian, and they look the other way when gay themes are brought out. And I know that a move is underway among universities now to retranslate a lot of the Greek and Roman works, and I hope that continues, because people pick these up and they think they're boring because the translations are terrible. The translations are mystifying. The Greeks had a tremendous enthusiasm for life and for sex and for color and art, and that comes out in their written works, but the translators often don't want people to see it.
It's kind of like Greek statues not being all white and chalky, but being painted.
That's right, the Greek statues, we see these Greek statues today, well, all the paint is worn off. You're seeing the fossil, you're not seeing the living creature. So they were colored, they loved bright colors, they were made to look as realistic as possible. And the same with our buildings. Those buildings were basically looked like psychedelic art. Their color was splashed all over them, every possible bright color you can imagine. They loved that. But unfortunately the color went, and the bones have survived.
How did the Symposium come down to us? What's its historical path to get to us?
Nearly all the works of Plato have survived, which is very unusual for an ancient Greek writer. And the people who made manuscripts survive were mostly monks, Christian monks, who copied things by hand. And the reason Plato's works survived and many of the works of Aristotle survived was because they were later used in a very truncated way to develop Christian theology. So there was a certain compatibility there that saved them from oblivion. Unfortunately, the same was not true of the poetry of Sappho. Sappho was regarded in antiquity as the equal of Homer. Great poet. Only a few fragments of her work survived, because she didn't have much to offer to help save Christian theology, basically. I keep hoping that someday they'll, in a desert in Egypt, they'll open up a building and find that someone had collected the works of Sappho, and there they will be for the world to enjoy again. Wouldn't that be wonderful?
That would be great. Any other thing you would like to say?
Thank you, Dan. This has been a lot of fun.